Be the envy of the neighborhood. 860 KKAT, where the grass is always greener. Welcome to Gardening Utah. Here's composter and show hoster, Jenna Francis.
Welcome to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jenna Francis. Every week here on Gardening Utah, I introduce you to experts across the state in all different kinds of topics. We talk about all things vegetables, flowers, trees, shrubs, and of course, your lawn. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope the show is something that you look forward to every week and it inspires you. And we're heading into a new year. Seed planting time is getting closer and closer. So you're going to want to stay tuned to Gardening Utah because we are going to keep you in the know on everything you need to do to get your seeds started, whether it's flowers, whether it's vegetables, no matter what it is. Stay with Gardening Utah all year and we're going to give you the best yard in the neighborhood. All you need to do is implement our tips and tricks. Okay, so listen, episodes drop every weekend on both Apple Podcast and Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. And by the way, did you hear me say Spotify? Yes, it's true. If you're listening to this on KKAT 860 AM, you can now also download our podcast on Spotify. So just bring out Spotify, go to Gardening Utah or search Gardening Utah, and you will find all of our episodes there, and you can binge listen to all the past episodes. And boy, do we have some amazing past episodes. Okay, so that's announcement number one. And here's announcement number two. If you have an ALEXA, now I'm spelling that out because I don't want mine to start talking while I'm recording this show. But if you have an Alexa, you can ask her to play Gardening Utah. So all you need to do is say, Alexa, play the podcast Gardening Utah. So again, just say, play the podcast Gardening Utah, and off you go. It will play the latest episode, and there you have it. So there's another tip. Oh, speaking of tips, it's time for the tip of the week.
860 KKAT with your Gardening Utah tip of the week.
My tip of the week is, yes, it's still a little bit early to plant those vegetable seeds and flower seeds. Now, listen, I know some of you are thinking, well, of course it's too early, but we do have a very large variety of listeners to Gardening Utah. Some are very new to gardening and some are really experienced. So we've been getting a lot of questions on our Instagram, direct messages, and other places saying, hey, when do I get my tomatoes in? How soon can I start my carrots and those kinds of things? Well, listen, stay tuned to Gardening Utah over the coming weeks and months because we're going to keep you in the know when it's time to get those cool season vegetables in the ground. You know, those root vegetables like peas and carrots and beets, spinach and cool season lettuces. And it's actually sooner than you think for those. But as far as starting seeds indoors, it's still a little bit early for that. Here's what you can do for now. Peruse your garden and seed catalogs. Look up other seed catalogs online. Go hog wild with it. I will put some in the episode notes of this episode in Apple Podcast and Spotify, so you can just have a look at some of my favorite seed catalogs that are online. But kind of look through and determine, what is your family going to eat? What do they enjoy eating through the year? And how much of it are they going to eat? Because really, you can get a little bit excited and buy way too many seed packets of the same thing. And I suggest not overdoing it because really, if you think about it, you're not planting more than, especially with like tomatoes and peppers and things, you're really only planting, in most cases, a couple of each different variety. And when each seed packet comes with many, many, many seeds, sometimes I'll have seed packets around for years. Anyway, another thing you can do is plan and design your vegetable garden. If you haven't made notes already on what worked last year and what didn't, it's a good time to do all those things. So it's still a little early to get those hands dirty and get those seeds planted. Just stay tuned to Gardening Utah.
And that's your Gardening Utah tip of the week, brought to you by the Advocates. If you're in an accident, you deserve an advocate. Call 801-355-5550 or visit utahadvocates.com. Never miss a tip for your garden and never miss an episode. The Gardening Utah Podcast with Jenna Francis on 860 KKAT.
Okay, speaking of seed starting and vegetable seed starting, I literally cannot wait. I just had to put in my personal opinion. I just seriously can't wait. Oh, it just feels like such a long winter. I just love it when everything starts to stay lighter, longer. We have longer evenings, and then things start poking up out of the ground. And you just have this promise of this upcoming spring. I just absolutely love it. It's my favorite time of year, although fall is a close second. I love me some good fall weather, but cannot wait for the spring. It cannot come soon enough. This year, I'm hoping to plant less tomato plants than last year, which if you've listened to this show, this is episode 35. You probably heard my diatribes about my 87 tomato plants last year. I will not be repeating that this year because I was a canning fool, which really kind of only is going to work during a lockdown when you're needing to stay home and not blend households and hang out with other people. And so I had the time this year, right? But, or last year, I should say. This year, I'm not going to put myself in that position again because that was just out of control. Staying up until 1 or 2 a.m. canning tomatoes just because I cannot waste one is ridiculous. Although I will say, the husband got a pizza oven for Christmas, and I have had so much fun making pizza sauce out of my fresh garden tomatoes. So boom, it was worth it. Anyway, so today's show is part 2 of Garden Myths Debunked with horticulturist Liz Hamilton and Cameron Allcott from Progressive Plants. So some of the topics we're going to discuss today. Are you really supposed to plant marigolds with your tomatoes? What does it actually do? Does it really do anything? Liz is going to talk about that. Should you add fertilizer when you plant? We're going to go over how to properly plant things like trees, shrubs, and perennials. So what do you really need to do to the ground? You read a lot of different advice on the internet of what to add to the soil or not, or what to put in before you put down the plant. Well, Cameron and Liz are going to talk about that. And we're just going to go over lots of other common advice we hear and see on the internet, but just may or may not be true. And I also want to go over a few things. Episode notes, okay? So if you're listening to this show on Apple Podcast or Spotify, you can always go to the episode notes, and I'm trying to be really good about adding information to there. So maybe it's a book that we reference, or maybe a product or something like that, and links to, our guests' websites will always be in the episode notes. So if you ever wonder, just grab your phone, hit episode notes, and have a look, and that will give you more resources of things that we discuss on the show. And I have one more great announcement before we get into this episode with Liz and Cameron. We are going to be running a giveaway, a contest, our very first one. It's going to start, I believe, next week, and I can't tell you with who it is yet, but I can tell you what it is. We are going to be giving away a raised garden bed. And I'm talking a $400 raised garden bed, okay? So stay tuned to future episodes of Gardening Utah, where we're going to discuss how you enter to win. So we'll be back after this quick break with Cameron Allcott and Liz Hamilton. Garden Myths Debunked. Stay with us.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden. Here's Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and with me today is Cameron Allcott with ProgressivePlants.com and horticulturist Liz Hamilton. And this is part 2 of Debunking Myths. And right now we're discussing NPK. Now, what is NPK? NPK are the 3 numbers on fertilizer that represents the value of those 3 macronutrients used by plants. And so you're standing in the fertilizer aisle of a garden or farm store, and you're looking at this array of numbers. You're looking at, 10, 10, 10, 20, 20, 20, 10, 8, 10, or many other combinations of numbers. And you're saying to yourself, okay, wait, what do these mean? Those are NPK values, and it stands for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, or NPK for short. But even we get a little confused.
Well, if you think about it, it's like 3rd grade science class, and I think that's like the last time that I remembered thinking about it.
I know, right? I know. It was like NPK, okay. Yeah.
I can't remember. I know potassium and phosphorus, but I can never remember which one's blooms and which one's
flat,
like roots.
Well, and even the bloom one, I mean, that's still mostly hormonal. Like it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get more blooms.
Right.
It just means you have enough potassium for flower production. It doesn't control the number of flowers that you get. It's just going to be like, oh, we need potassium to bloom. If we don't have enough potassium, we're not going to have a strong bloom cycle. It has nothing to do with the number of flowers or really to the quality of the flowers. It's just basically to flower. So
got it.
And the quality and size of the blooms is proportional to and the amount is varietal and environmental, not necessarily fertilizer based. So
if it's too hot or too cold, I mean, that's going to affect flower size mostly more than anything. Humidity levels,
drought. Those flowers are small when it's warm and dry.
Yeah, like trees and a lot of plants that we ship in from Oregon in the summer have these leaves that are ginormous. And sometimes even flowers that are huge. So we'll get maple trees that come in and they have leaves that are easily the size of your head, because they're grown at sea level, pretty much, whatever Portland is, and high humidity, lower temperatures, typically, a lot less stress, and an abundance of water. Where the same tree, if you bring it in here and it winters over and then it leaves out again here in Utah, the leaves are going to be half the size, and they'll just never get as big just because we are a higher elevation. We have less air pressure, I guess, really, and lower humidity. I mean, it's not conducive to large leaf production.
Large leaves means high respiration rate. So it's in the plant's best interest when you're in a drought area with not a lot of water to have smaller leaves. It's a biological response.
Yeah, difficult to deal with. That's a myth that needs to go away.
Yeah.
And I mean, so basically when you what's the healing response on a tree? Trees don't heal, they seal, right? So when you cut a branch off, you'll see that that old branch collar try to close over that wound, and it's you'll see those large scar tissue do that, but it's not going to seal over it like it never existed. A tree isn't going to just you with a scab, eventually that scab falls off and is never even there. A tree is going to seal in the damage and try to close that off so that bugs and debris doesn't get through. But it's not ever going to just heal. And so the myth is if you paint or try to seal the wound or whatever, the tree can focus on healing or something. I don't even really understand what it is, but if you do that, you can actually inhibit the sealing, what the tree's trying to do. And then the other thing is you can also potentially, if you're cutting lots of trees at the same time and you're going through and you're treating them all, and you're going tree to tree to tree, and then you're picking up bacteria and moving through all of those wounds, because it's not antibacterial tree paint. I mean, you're just sealing in that disease with it. The other one I've seen that's really extreme is if you have a branch break and it rips through and then you have a divot into the tree, people will pour cement into the hole. Have you seen that?
Oh, no.
My neighbor did that when I was a little kid. He came by and was like, I'll just pour cement in there. And we had a tree with a giant cement hole in it. And the thought process there was, if I cement it, then nothing can get in behind it. But basically all you do is make it so that when things are behind it, you can't see it anymore.
Hey, Liz.
That's also, if you do see that, don't do that either.
Yeah.
Hey, Liz, I am so sorry that you had a traumatic childhood.
Watching my neighbor cement in the trees.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was really tough for me. Cried myself to sleep for months.
We should talk about insect repellent plants, because that comes up a lot.
Oh yes, you mean the geranium that keeps mosquitoes away from your patio table?
Yeah, I've heard lavenders, citronella. Lavender was
basil.
one that
that's one that Me Gardener talks about quite a bit.
Yeah. Lavender, I remember, other than being like a cure for cancer, which it's not, people, it's really not. Like I remember, like I saw a post like on the internet. It was like, plant lavender to get rid of mosquitoes, and I was like, oh, that's kind of funny because I'm out here like pruning all of my lavender plants and getting eaten by mosquitoes at the same time while that's happening. So I'm like, yeah, that one's not true. Marigolds don't do anything.
They did a study. Marigolds don't prevent anything except one variety of nematode, which is soil-borne. So there is it does prevent one type of nematode.
Okay, what does that nematode feed on?
I don't know. I didn't read that far into it. I just laughed. But they did find that it repelled one type of nematode.
Okay, so that being said, that's another myth there then. There's so many YouTube videos and anything, magazine articles to plant marigolds with your tomatoes. But do those nematodes attack tomatoes? If that's
I don't know. I didn't read the whole thing. I should have. I will say this, so marigolds aren't a very tall plant. There are some that are tall. You can buy like waist high marigolds and things like that. Not that most of us grow those, but you'll see like, oh, they repel aphids, or oh, they do this, or oh, they do that. And I'm like, my tomato plant's 6 foot tall. How is my 2 foot tall or lower marigold doing anything for the top of this plant? Aphids are windborne. Aphids fly. Like they're not crawling up the stem and finding my plant. And so I think there's a lot of like, or I've heard the one like they can smell the marigolds and they don't come. There's not too many insects out there with a very acute sense of smell, or they're like genetically produced, like can smell one or two things like their food sources, but they're not smelling, like they're not out there being repelled by other scents.
Yeah, if this was one of those myths that were true, I'm thinking to myself, like I've grown like hundreds of thousands of marigolds in my greenhouse and I still get aphids on the plants. So I'm like, no.
Yeah, or like or people will just like blanket statement, they repel insects. And I'm like, have you seen what happens when they get into the earwigs? The earwigs will eat marigolds to the ground and there's a nub and there's nothing.
Yeah.
Earwigs love marigolds.
Overnight, you'll walk out and they're gonzo.
Yeah, or like this is horrifying when you go out at night with the flashlight and you'll shine across it, and where your marigold is, it's like a black moving shiny
good Lord,
like group of nasty earwigs all in there eating it. Like that's not repelling anything right now.
This is giving me a bad memory of this very summer this happened to me.
Yeah. You shine, you're like, what is that? And it's like, oh, it's like 8,000 earwigs eating this marigold plant. Yeah, that's what
I think what happens
are made of.
Yes.
I think what happens a lot of times with like a lot of these like myths or even marketing for like a lot of products that you see at the store and stuff are basically interpretations of scientific conclusions that have been had. But they're like, oh, wait, we can maybe make this into a thing and make some money off of it, because I mean, we're a capitalist society. Like I get it. We're going to prey upon the ignorance of people to make money. I mean, yeah, who wouldn't do that, other than the 3 people that are on this call right now. So,
that's right.
So I mean, the one that I really look at is like mycorrhiza. I mean, we've seen a lot of stuff about like mycorrhizas, being sold or whatever. It's like, you have to inoculate your plant with mycorrhiza in order for it to grow. Yes, the mycorrhiza is a beneficial fungus that attaches to the roots that helps, with the uptake of like nitrogen and other nutrients. I mean, it's a very symbiotic relationship. Now, what is not really conveyed is that there are typically very specific mycorrhizas for very specific species of plants. So when you buy
it's a symbiotic relationship. All mycorrhizae are not created equal for all plants.
Exactly. So just because you went and got a bucket of mycorrhiza from someplace because they said it was going to help your plants, doesn't necessarily mean that what's in that bucket is going to be there or is appropriate for that particular plant.
Or this environment. Maybe it doesn't even
or
live
the environment.
Here,
right.
You're just putting dead fungus in your hole, which might actually like the anaerobic dead bacteria and stuff. Like maybe it helps that way, but it's not doing anything for your roots.
Right. And there have been studies upon studies upon studies about how mycorrhiza is actually really only going to be really beneficial when the plant is exposed to it at a seedling stage, so that the mycorrhiza can grow along with the plant. Like once it's already at an adult phase, like it doesn't really spread that way because it has to spread on the cell walls of the roots. So like it doesn't really quite work the way that people think it does, because there's been no scientific evidence that supports like late life inoculation actually improves plant health. They've actually found that there's like almost no difference at all. So it's just one of those things, like if it's inoculated at the seedling stage, like if you had a cutting, yes, but later on, doesn't really matter.
Got it.
So it's just like one of the few scientific papers that I've actually read.
Well, you know what, Cameron? You're one scientific paper ahead of me. Okay. I don't know why I think that's so funny. And I'm kind of kidding. Okay. So it is time for a break right here on Gardening Utah. But when we come back, we're going to continue the discussion with Liz and Cameron. And this time we're going to dispel and discuss how you should actually plant when you are digging a big hole for either a tree, a shrub, or a perennial or anything like that. A lot of different opinions and a lot of different myths out there on what you should do to the ground. And we're going to tackle that right after this. Stay with us.
860 KKAT with Jenna Francis and Gardening Utah, where it's always mulch time. She really does have the nicest yard on the block. It's Gardening Utah with Jenna Francis on 860 KKAT.
Welcome back to your favorite gardening show, Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jenna Francis, and with me today is Cameron Allcott with ProgressivePlants.com and horticulturist Liz Hamilton. And in this segment, we're going to be discussing whether or not you should amend soil when you plant and all kinds of interesting things. Okay, I got a good one here. Adding fertilizer when you dig a hole for a tree or shrub or plants helps the transplant establish faster.
Can.
It's not, no, because I mean, I'll do slow release type things. We have like these Agriform tablets that are just really nitrogen heavy, because we want plants to have access to that to promote like leaf growth. Because like if you have enough leaf growth, it's enough photosynthesis for it to make food, which causes root growth and is like faster establishment in the landscape. So when you add the fertilizer, I think can be kind of tricky, because like late season additions of fertilizers aren't completely necessary, because you're not trying to push growth as a tree's starting to shut down as we're going into September or October.
Adding nitrogen to the hole when you're planting and something is dormant doesn't make any sense. But it might help if you add phosphorus, because then it can help it establish over the course of the winter. So what you add and when you're adding it is important. Yeah. I always add Osmocote to every new planting.
I do too.
Which is usually in the springtime for me.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a waste.
Yeah, I've just read that you got to be careful that it's not too high in nitrogen, because it can give the roots less incentive to branch out and absorb nutrients in the actual, regular soil.
Yeah. So there's a myth in that. In soil amendments, not necessarily with fertilizer, but with so you have rocky junk clay soil. I'm going to dig my hole like 3 times as wide. And then instead of backfilling with native soil, I'm going to backfill with compost or backfill with this fancy garden soil or this, that, and the other. And you should not do that.
Yeah.
That is a myth.
Yes.
Like I've never been a big fan of like amending soil at the time of planting. It creates weird issues in the soil. Adding like an organic layer on the top of the soil and allowing it to break down and kind of work its way in.
That's the way to do it.
That is the way to do it. That improves soil health. But, when it comes to like taking like potted plants and then amending the soil, like in the immediate vicinity of or like in the hole or anything like that. Generally speaking, what I've kind of found, especially with stuff that's grown out of state, they have a different soil mix than what we would use here, because on the coastal areas, they get so much water, they're trying to drain water away. So the soil mixes are very, very loose. And then we take those plants and then we stick them in our really clay soil and try to amend it with more organic material. And all it really does is create like this weird little bathtub.
Yeah.
Where part of it will, because it's so loose, it'll evaporate water out quickly. But below a certain point, it just retains a whole bunch of water, and you get a lot of like anaerobic processes going on there, which actually causes root death and then kills the plant. Mm-hmm. So it's best to try to plant something that has a similar potting media as what your native soil is, because it's easier to manage the water at that point.
Or root wash.
Or root wash. Yeah, you could just root wash and then just do it that way. But
depending on the time of year.
Yeah, that's not a practice that I wholly want to like advocate in July.
Yeah, that one has a little bit. It may not work for us, but it may be in the spring.
I want to play around with that a little bit. If I ever get some free time, I'm going to do some massive root washing experiments. Yeah,
I think that the scientific evidence behind root washing and this, that, and the other is mostly happening in the Pacific Northwest, where it's really humid. You're not worried about respirating leaves and draining the plant and stunting the roots and things like that. And so root washing, could be really successful for them. But with us, it's very dry. Our soil is very different. There's not a lot of organic material, and you root wash all that soil off, then you're potentially looking at another issue. But I think the other one with like pouring non-native soil into a hole and then putting your tree into it, what the evidence tells us there is that what happens is that the plant will, like if you've created this large bowl and you've planted right in the center of it, the plant will send out roots into all that new soil, and then it will hit your rocky junk soil all the way around it. And then it will, just like if it was in a nursery can, it will start to circle its roots in the good soil that you've put down, and it won't branch out into the native dirt. And also you potentially can create, depending on the type of soil you put down versus the type of soil that's native, a perched water table. So like kind of what Cameron was talking about is the water comes down and then it sits and it won't percolate down through that native soil, especially if you have something loose and then below you is a clay, or if you have something really organic and below you is a sand. You'd think sand will percolate that water down, but what it does is, think of when water is moving through layers, like in a pot, you'll see where it'll bounce and then it'll hit and it'll go until it finds a resistance somewhere else. And so you're ending up with that weird water table here, and it's sitting and you don't even know what's in there. Yep. And so that's also like ties into the, like, should I put rocks at the bottom of my container plant in my pot? And what that does is it creates a perched water table, and people think that putting rocks on the bottom of their pot is going to create good drainage. And what it does is it percolates down through the bottom of that soil and it hits here, which is hydrophobic, and it sits in that soil and backs up. And it won't drain down through those rocks because you've created that perched water table. And so you actually have worse drainage putting rocks at the bottom of your pot, or in the hole. You'll see that too. Oh, I'm going to plant my tree and I'm going to put rocks at the bottom.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got to go, huh? You have your...
Yeah, I got to go. So
okay.
Anyway, it was absolutely fun being on here. It's always a good time to hang out with you, Jana. Really so fun. I will see you a little bit later.
Sounds good.
And yeah, Liz, I'm sure we'll probably connect again here really soon.
Well, Liz, thank you so much for being on today's episode of Gardening Utah. Cameron had to jump out on us for a meeting, but as always, you guys are amazing guests, and you do so much for us here at Gardening Utah, as well as you're so amazing to respond to so many Utahns' questions about gardening on the Utah Gardeners Facebook group. So you guys give so much of your free time for really no other reason than just to educate and inform and inspire. So that is just so appreciated. If I could speak on behalf of the 16,000 members of the Utah Gardens Facebook page, or whatever we're at right now. Anyway, if you are listening to this episode and you're thinking to yourself, well, I have an expertise and I'd really love Jana to interview me on this show, send me a DM. Go to Instagram and send me a message. Our handle is @GardeningUtah, obvi. And send me a little message and let me know, tell me about yourself, and let's see if we could have you on a future show. As well as if you're a listener and you would like me to interview an expert that you know of, or I haven't tackled a topic that you're really interested in, send me a DM. I love to hear from our listeners and tell me what you think about the show. And speaking of, if you are listening to this on Apple Podcast or on Spotify, I would absolutely love it if you would do two things. One, I would love it if you would subscribe if you haven't already, because you will always be notified when we drop new episodes. And two, I would love you to give us a 5-star rating. I'm just going to be humble about it and tell you straight up, we would love your 5-star ratings and reviews, because that is what helps us stick around and get found in Apple Podcast and in Spotify. Anyway, I love to read 5-star ratings on the show, so give us some love and we'll give it right back, and you'll hear your name on the radio and in the podcast. Oh, shout out to our producer, Lambo. I'm Jana Francis. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week right here on Gardening Utah. And remember, grow big or go home.
When you're ready to grow big or go home, make your neighbors green with envy. Get the Gardening in Utah podcast, Gardening Utah. Available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden.
We are supported by ProgressivePlants.com. ProgressivePlants.com. They are your neighbors next door and experts at helping you choose the perfect and unique plants that will thrive in your location. Progressive Plants is passionate about helping homeowners, expert gardeners, novices alike choose the correct plant for your soil. They don't just grow plants, they know plants. Let Progressive Plants help you today. Just go to ProgressivePlants.com and check out their wide selection. You can also go to the Design tab and look at the expert designers that they have that can help you plan your perfect yard. Visit ProgressivePlants.com today.